Commander Lisa Hayes stared at the datapad in her hands and felt her heart sink. Another rookie assignment. The brass at Coalition Command seemed to think her unit was some kind of training ground for misfits and problems. This time, they were sending her a human. She had never worked with one before but had heard the stories. Primitive species from a backwater planet that had barely survived first contact. Their technology was centuries behind most Coalition members, and their military experience was limited to fighting each other on their single world. The transport docked with their ship, and Lisa watched through the viewport as a single figure walked down the ramp. Jake Morrison looked ordinary enough. Average height for a human, brown hair, calm eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He carried standard Coalition gear and an old fabric bag that looked like it had seen better days. Lisa noticed he walked differently than most species. There was something in the way he moved that suggested he was always ready for trouble. Her squad gathered in the cargo bay to meet their new member. Zenthka was their demolitions expert, a large reptilian creature with scales that changed color based on his mood. Right now, they were showing mild irritation. Veltar clicked her mandibles in what passed for amusement among her insectoid species. The communications specialist rarely found anything funny, so this was unusual. Borkin hummed softly, a crystalline being whose empathic abilities let him sense emotions from other crew members. Thrick simply floated nearby, a gaseous form that could phase through solid matter when needed. Jake nodded to each of them as Lisa made introductions. He spoke little, but listened carefully. When Zenthka made a comment about humans being too primitive for real military work, Jake just smiled and said nothing. Lisa found his calm reaction more unsettling than anger would have been. Their first mission came 3 days later. Coalition Command wanted them to escort a medical supply convoy through the Veil Nebula. It was supposed to be routine work. Pirates rarely attacked well-defended convoys, and the Veil Nebula was considered relatively safe space. Lisa briefed the squad on standard escort protocols. They would fly in diamond formation around the cargo ships and maintain sensor sweeps for any hostile contacts. Jake listened to the briefing without comment, but Lisa noticed him studying the tactical displays more carefully than seemed necessary for such a simple mission. When she asked if he had questions, he just shook his head and said he understood the plan. The convoy consisted of 12 cargo haulers carrying medical supplies to colonies in the Outer Rim. Lisa's ship took point position while 2 other Coalition escorts covered the flanks. Everything proceeded normally for the first 6 hours. The cargo ships maintained formation and their sensors showed clear space ahead. Then Veltar detected multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace directly in front of the convoy. 15 pirate ships appeared in attack formation. This was far more than intelligence had suggested they might encounter. Most pirate groups in this area operated with 3 or 4 ships at most. 15 ships meant serious organization and firepower. Lisa ordered the convoy to emergency stop while the escorts moved to defensive positions. The pirates opened fire immediately, concentrating their attacks on the escort ships rather than the cargo vessels. This told Lisa they wanted the supplies intact and were willing to fight for them. The Coalition escorts followed standard defensive doctrine. They positioned themselves between the pirates and the convoy while calling for reinforcements. Lisa knew it would take at least 2 hours for help to arrive. The pirates seemed to know this too because they pressed their attack without hesitation. Within minutes, it became clear that standard tactics were not working. The pirates had studied Coalition defensive patterns and knew how to counter them. They used superior numbers to force the escorts out of position, then began targeting the cargo ships. 2 haulers took heavy damage and began falling behind the formation. Lisa watched her carefully planned defense crumble and felt panic starting to set in. Her squad was good at following orders, but none of them had experience with this level of chaos. Zenthka kept asking for permission to fire his heavy weapons, but there were too many friendly ships in the way. Veltar was overwhelmed trying to coordinate communications between all the vessels. Borkin reported rising stress levels throughout the convoy crews. That was when Jake spoke up for the first time since the battle began. He asked Lisa if he could make a suggestion. She was desperate enough to listen to anything at this point, so she told him to go ahead. Jake pointed to the tactical display and explained that the pirates were using a standard pincer movement. They expected the escorts to maintain defensive positions around the convoy. Instead of playing defense, he suggested they should attack, but not the way coalition forces usually attacked. He wanted to target the pirate command ship first, then use the confusion to hit their flanks. Lisa started to explain that this violated basic escort protocols, but Jake interrupted her. He said protocols were written for normal situations, and this was not normal. The pirates had too many ships for a defensive battle. Their only chance was to disrupt the pirate formation before they could destroy the convoy. Lisa made a decision that would change everything. She told Jake to coordinate the attack while she handled overall command. Jake immediately began giving orders in a calm voice that somehow cut through the chaos. He told Zenth-Ka to prepare proximity mines and launch them toward the pirate flanks. Not to hit ships, but to force them to change course. He had Veltar jam pirate communications on rotating frequencies to prevent them from coordinating their attacks. Most surprisingly, Jake ordered the cargo ships to break formation and scatter in different directions. This went against every rule in the Coalition manual, but Lisa found herself repeating his orders. The convoy captains protested, but began complying when they realized the alternative was being destroyed. The pirates had expected the convoy to maintain formation while the escorts protected them. When the cargo ships scattered, the pirate attack plan fell apart. They had to split their forces to chase individual haulers instead of concentrating firepower on the escorts. Jake used this confusion to launch his real attack. He had Lisa's ship accelerate directly toward the largest pirate vessel, while Zenth-Ka's mines forced the escort ships to move out of supporting positions. It looked like a suicide run, but Jake had calculated the timing perfectly. Just as the pirates began concentrating fire on Lisa's ship, the proximity mines detonated behind them. The explosions did not destroy any pirate ships, but they created enough electromagnetic interference to blind their sensors for crucial seconds. Jake used those seconds to get close enough for Zenth-Ka to use his heavy weapons effectively. The pirate command ship took massive damage and began falling back. With their command ship disabled, the other pirate vessels lost coordination. Jake ordered the scattered convoy ships to regroup at a rally point he had selected earlier. The cargo haulers began moving toward safety while the coalition escorts covered their withdrawal. The pirates tried to reorganize for another attack, but Jake had anticipated this. He had Thrix phase through the hull of a damaged pirate ship and disable their engines from inside. This created more confusion as the pirates tried to figure out how their ship had been sabotaged. By the time reinforcements arrived, the convoy was safe and the pirates were retreating. Lisa found herself staring at the tactical display in amazement. They had faced overwhelming odds and not only survived, but driven off a superior force. Jake was already helping coordinate damage control on the cargo ships as if nothing unusual had happened. Later that night, Lisa reviewed the mission logs. Jake had improvised explosive devices from medical supplies, used unconventional tactics that no Coalition Academy taught, and demonstrated a level of adaptability that shocked everyone involved. His actions had saved the convoy, but violated 17 separate military protocols in the process. Lisa realized she was going to have trouble explaining this to her superiors, but as she watched Jake quietly helping repair damaged systems, she began to understand that maybe the brass had been wrong about humans being primitive. Maybe they were something else entirely. Coalition Command was not happy with Lisa's mission report. She sat in the debriefing room answering questions from 3 different admirals who seemed more concerned about protocol violations than mission success. They wanted to know why she had allowed an untested human to coordinate combat operations. They questioned every tactical decision Jake had made during the battle. Lisa found herself defending tactics she did not fully understand. When Admiral Keth Ra asked why the convoy had been ordered to scatter, Lisa could only repeat Jake's explanation about disrupting enemy attack patterns. The admirals exchanged looks that suggested they thought she was making excuses for poor command decisions. The questioning went on for hours. Lisa began to wonder if her career was over. Then Admiral Keth Ra played back the sensor recordings from the battle. The room went quiet as they watched Jake's unconventional tactics unfold in real time. Even the admirals had to admit that the results spoke for themselves. The convoy had been saved with minimal casualties against overwhelming odds. Admiral Keth Ra finally dismissed Lisa with a warning about following proper protocols in future missions. But she also noted that Unit Epsilon 7 would be receiving additional training opportunities to test their capabilities. Lisa was not sure if this was good news or bad news. Back on her ship, Lisa found Jake working on routine maintenance tasks, as if nothing had happened. She asked him where he had learned the tactics he used during the battle. Jake looked up from the power coupling he was repairing and said it was just common sense. When Lisa pressed him for details, he explained that the pirates had made their intentions clear by their formation and targeting priorities. Everything else had followed logically from that observation. Lisa realized that what Jake called common sense was actually advanced tactical analysis that most coalition officers learned only after years of study. Yet he seemed to do it instinctively, without any formal training. She began to wonder what other capabilities humans might have that the coalition did not understand. Training exercises over the next few weeks revealed more surprises. Jake consistently outperformed expectations in simulated combat scenarios. He excelled when situations became chaotic and unpredictable. While other species followed doctrine and sought to impose order on confusion, Jake seemed to thrive in disorder. During one exercise, the squad was tasked with clearing a hostile station using standard boarding procedures. They were supposed to advance methodically from section to section while maintaining formation and communication. Jake ignored these procedures completely. He moved ahead of the formation, used maintenance shafts instead of corridors, and improvised weapons from materials he found on the station. Zenth Ka complained that Jake was not following the plan. But when the exercise ended, Jake had neutralized twice as many targets as the rest of the squad combined. His unconventional approach had confused the computer opponents who were programmed to counter standard coalition tactics. Veltar began studying human military history and was disturbed by what she found. Humans had spent their entire recorded history fighting wars against each other. Their planet had seen conflicts involving millions of soldiers and weapons capable of destroying entire cities. What the coalition considered primitive, humans considered recent history. Borkin spent more time around Jake and began picking up emotional impressions that worried him. The human carried a level of controlled aggression that was unlike anything Borkin had encountered in other species. Most beings became emotional when threatened. Jake became calmer and more focused. Borkin realized that Jake was not afraid of violence, but had learned to use it as a tool. This became clear during their second major mission. Coalition Command sent them to investigate suspicious activity at mining station Delta 9. Intelligence suggested possible smuggling operations, but nothing that required heavy firepower. Lisa expected another routine assignment. They docked at the station and began interviewing personnel. Everything seemed normal until Veltar detected unauthorized transmissions from the station's command center. When they went to investigate, they found the station manager and 3 workers being held hostage by armed criminals. The hostage situation was exactly the kind of scenario that coalition protocols were designed to handle. Lisa began setting up a perimeter and calling for negotiation specialists. The criminals had fortified positions and clear lines of fire. Standard procedure called for containment and patience until experts could resolve the situation peacefully. Jake observed the layout for several minutes, then approached Lisa with a different plan. He wanted to create a distraction while Thrix phased through the walls to disable the criminals' weapons. Lisa pointed out that this plan accepted significant risks and could result in hostage casualties. Jake agreed, but explained that the alternative was a prolonged standoff that would likely end in more deaths. Lisa hesitated but remembered how Jake's unconventional thinking had saved the convoy. She authorized his plan despite her misgivings. Jake positioned himself where the criminals could see him clearly, then began walking toward their position, with his hands visible but not raised. He was talking calmly as he approached, but Lisa could not hear what he was saying. The criminals shouted for him to stop, but Jake kept walking and talking. His body language suggested confidence rather than surrender. The criminals became agitated and began pointing weapons at him while demanding he explain what he was doing. Lisa realized that Jake was deliberately drawing their attention and keeping them focused on him. While the criminals were distracted, Thrix phased through the walls behind them and began disabling their equipment. Jake timed his approach perfectly. Just as Thrix finished sabotaging the criminals' weapons, Jake dove for cover and gave the signal to attack. The criminals tried to fire, but their weapons had been disabled. In the confusion that followed, Lisa's squad was able to secure the hostages and capture the criminals without casualties. The entire operation took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Later, Lisa reviewed recordings of Jake's approach and realized he had been using psychological tactics that were not taught in any coalition military academy. He had projected confidence while approaching armed opponents, used verbal misdirection to keep them confused, and calculated risks in ways that coalition doctrine considered reckless. The mission report again raised questions at command. Admiral Kethra wanted to know why Lisa had authorized such an aggressive approach when negotiation was still possible. Lisa tried to explain Jake's reasoning, but found herself defending decisions she was not entirely comfortable with. This time, the questioning was different. Instead of criticism, Lisa sensed curiosity from her superiors. They wanted to understand how Jake's mind worked and whether his tactics could be replicated by other species. Admiral Kethra asked if Jake would be willing to consult on training scenarios. Lisa promised to ask, but was not sure what Jake's response would be. When she presented the request, Jake seemed surprised that anyone would be interested in his opinions. He agreed to help with training exercises, but warned that his methods might not work for other species. Over the following weeks, Jake began working with coalition tactical instructors. They were fascinated by his approach to problem-solving and his willingness to accept calculated risks, but they also found his methods difficult to systematize. What worked for Jake did not necessarily work for others, because his tactics relied on intuition and split-second decision-making under pressure. Veltar compiled a report on human capabilities that she shared with the squad. She had discovered that humans possessed several unusual traits that gave them advantages in warfare. They could function effectively under extreme stress, make rapid decisions with incomplete information, and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Most importantly, they seemed to be natural pattern recognition specialists who could read enemy intentions and counter them instinctively. Zenthka remained skeptical until a training exercise where he was paired with Jake against superior numbers. Jake taught him to use demolitions not just as weapons but as psychological tools to create fear and confusion in enemy ranks. The lesson worked so well that Zenthka began requesting more training sessions. Lisa noticed that her squad was changing. They were becoming more aggressive and confident in their capabilities. Jake's influence was making them think differently about combat and tactics. She was not sure if this was good or bad, but she could not argue with their improved performance. Scores.Coalition Command took notice of these improvements. Unit Epsilon 7 began receiving more challenging assignments. Their success rate remained high, but Lisa noticed their missions were becoming increasingly dangerous. She suspected they were being tested to determine the limits of their new capabilities. Tapati. Testing was about to become much more serious. The new assignments started coming faster than before. Lisa noticed that Command was sending them to situations where conventional coalition forces had failed or been unable to make progress. They were told these missions were rewards for their recent successes, but Jake suspected they were being tested. His suspicions proved correct when they received orders to extract a coalition diplomat from a war zone. The briefing made it clear this would be their most dangerous mission yet. Ambassador Velkan had been captured during peace negotiations on the contested world of Kepler-7. Intelligence indicated he was being held in a heavily fortified compound controlled by separatist forces. 3 previous rescue attempts by regular coalition forces had failed with heavy casualties. Lisa studied the mission parameters and felt her confidence wavering. The compound was surrounded by defensive positions and patrolled by well-armed guards. The separatists had anti-aircraft weapons that made direct assault impossible. Standard coalition doctrine called for siege tactics that could take weeks to succeed. The ambassador might not survive that long. Jake examined the intelligence reports and tactical surveys with the quiet intensity that had become familiar to his squad mates. He asked detailed questions about guard rotations, supply deliveries, and the compound's construction. Lisa noticed he was paying particular attention to information that seemed irrelevant to the rescue mission. Zenth had learned to trust Jake's unconventional thinking during their recent training exercises. The reptilian warrior now found himself curious about human tactical methods rather than skeptical. He asked Jake what approach he would recommend for penetrating the compound's defenses. Jake's answer disturbed everyone except Thrix, who had developed an appreciation for creative problem-solving. Jake wanted to turn the separatists' own aggression against them. Instead of trying to sneak past their defenses, he proposed making them abandon their positions voluntarily. The plan would require accepting significant personal risk and using psychological warfare tactics that coalition doctrine considered ethically questionable. Veltar had been studying human military history and recognized elements of Jake's plan from historical Earth conflicts. Humans had used similar strategies during their world wars when facing superior enemy positions. The tactics worked, but often resulted in high casualties and were considered brutal by coalition standards. Borkin sensed the emotional tension in the squad as they discussed Jake's proposal. The empathic crystalline being could feel their uncertainty about crossing ethical lines that had been clearly defined in their training. But he could also sense their growing confidence in Jake's ability to find solutions where others had failed. Lisa faced a decision that would define her command career. She could follow standard protocols and attempt a conventional rescue that would likely fail. Or she could authorize Jake's plan and accept responsibility for whatever consequences followed. The thought of Ambassador Velkan dying in captivity while she played it safe made the choice for her. The mission began with Jake doing something that violated every rule of stealth operations. Instead of approaching the compound quietly, he announced their presence by setting off explosions near the outer perimeter. The separatist guards responded exactly as he had predicted, rushing to investigate the disturbances and leaving gaps in their defensive coverage. But Jake's real strategy was more complex than simple distraction. He had studied the separatists' previous responses to coalition attacks and identified patterns in their behavior. They always concentrated their forces at points of contact and tried to overwhelm attackers with superior firepower. Jake intended to use this predictable response to manipulate their movements. Thrix phased through the compound walls while the guards were distracted and began planting small explosive devices in strategic locations. These were not meant to cause casualties, but to create noise and confusion at crucial moments. Jake coordinated the timing so that explosions would drive guards toward predetermined positions where they could be contained or avoided. Zenth initially objected to using his demolitions expertise for psychological manipulation rather than direct attack. But as he watched Jake's plan unfold, he began to understand the elegance of using enemy psychology as a weapon. The separatists were being herded like livestock without realizing it. Veltar provided communication support by intercepting and analyzing separatist radio traffic. She discovered that Jake had correctly predicted their response patterns. The enemy commanders were becoming increasingly frustrated as their forces reacted to threats that seemed to vanish as soon as they arrived. The psychological pressure began, affecting separatist decision-making exactly as Jake had intended. Their commanders started making emotional choices instead of tactical ones. They divided their forces to chase multiple apparent threats and lost coordination between their defensive positions. Jake used this confusion to approach the building where Ambassador Vel Khan was being held. Instead of fighting his way through the guards, he convinced them that the compound was under massive attack and they needed to evacuate their prisoner to a secure location. The guards actually helped him move the ambassador toward what they thought was safety, but was actually the extraction point. Borkin monitored the emotional states of everyone involved and was amazed by Jake's ability to manipulate the separatists' fear and confusion. The humans seemed to understand instinctively how different species would react under stress and used that knowledge to predict their behavior. The rescue succeeded with minimal casualties on either side. Ambassador Vel Khan was extracted safely, while most of the separatist forces remained convinced they had repelled a major coalition assault. Jake's psychological tactics had created the illusion of overwhelming attack while actually using minimal force. But the mission's success came at a cost that Lisa had not anticipated. Video recordings of Jake's tactics began circulating through coalition military networks. Some officers praised his creative problem-solving, while others questioned the ethics of using psychological manipulation in warfare. Admiral Kethra summoned Lisa for another debriefing, but this time the tone was different. Instead of criticism, she faced intense curiosity about Jake's methods. The Admiral wanted detailed explanations of how Jake had predicted enemy responses and manipulated their behavior so effectively. Lisa found herself explaining concepts she was still learning to understand. Jake's approach to warfare was fundamentally different from coalition doctrine. Where most species sought to impose order and follow established procedures, Jake embraced chaos and used unpredictability as a strategic advantage. The debriefing lasted for days as various coalition experts questioned Lisa about every aspect of the mission. Psychologists wanted to understand how Jake manipulated enemy emotions. Tacticians were interested in his ability to predict behavioral patterns. Ethicists debated whether his methods violated the laws of warfare. During this process, Lisa learned that her unit was being studied at the highest levels of coalition command. Jake's success rate and unconventional methods had attracted attention from species across the galaxy. Some wanted to learn human tactical approaches, while others expressed concern about their implications. The official conclusion was that Unit Epsilon 7 had demonstrated exceptional capabilities, but needed careful oversight to ensure their methods remained within acceptable parameters. Lisa was not sure what this meant for their future assignments, but suspected significant changes were coming. Those changes became apparent when their next orders arrived. Unit Epsilon 7 was being transferred from routine operations to Special Assignments Division. Their new classification gave them access to advanced equipment and higher security clearances, but it also meant their missions would involve situations too sensitive for regular coalition forces. Jake accepted these changes with his usual calm demeanor, but Lisa noticed he was spending more time reviewing tactical databases and studying the capabilities of various alien species. She realized he was preparing for conflicts that would test the limits of his unconventional approach to warfare. Zenthka asked Jake what he expected from their new assignment status. Jake's answer was characteristically direct. He said they would probably face situations where normal tactics would not work, and acceptable casualties would be higher than anyone wanted to admit. The coalition was learning that some problems required solutions that looked more like human warfare than the civilized conflicts they preferred. Veltar compiled reports on Jake's psychological tactics and distributed them to the squad. She wanted everyone to understand the principles behind his methods so they could support his strategies more effectively. The reports revealed that Jake was using techniques developed during humanity's long history of asymmetric warfare against superior opponents. Borkin expressed concern about the emotional toll these missions might take on the squad. Using psychological manipulation and accepting higher casualty rates went against his species' empathic nature. But he also recognized that Jake's methods were often more humane than prolonged conventional warfare that resulted in greater suffering. 6 months after their transfer to Special Operations, Unit Epsilon 7 had become something that Coalition Command both valued and feared. Their mission success rate remained perfect, but their methods continued to challenge every assumption about acceptable warfare. Lisa found herself briefing admirals who wanted to understand how her squad accomplished the impossible, while simultaneously worrying about what they were becoming. Their latest assignment involved a situation that had stalled. 3 different coalition task forces. A rogue admiral named Korthak had seized control of a military research station and was threatening to release classified weapon designs to hostile forces. The station's defenses made direct assault impossible, and Korthak had proven immune to negotiation attempts. Jake studied the intelligence reports with his usual methodical approach. He asked questions that revealed how thoroughly he understood the psychological profile of their target. Korthak was a career military officer who had been passed over for promotion multiple times. His decision to go rogue was motivated by resentment and a desire to prove his worth through dramatic action. Lisa watched Jake work and realized how much her own tactical thinking had evolved. 6 months ago, she would have focused on the station's defensive capabilities and looked for ways to overcome them through superior firepower. Now she found herself analyzing Korthak's emotional state and trying to understand what he hoped to accomplish. The plan Jake developed was more complex than anything he had attempted before. Instead of attacking the station directly, he wanted to manipulate Korthak's psychological state until the rogue admiral made mistakes that would expose vulnerabilities. This would require psychological warfare techniques that pushed the boundaries of acceptable military conduct. Zenth Ka had become Jake's most enthusiastic supporter after seeing how effectively human tactics worked in practice. The reptilian warrior now suggested modifications to Jake's plans that incorporated his own species' understanding of intimidation and dominance displays. Their collaboration produced strategies that neither could have developed alone. Veltar provided intelligence, support that went far beyond her original communications role. She had learned to analyze behavioral patterns in radio intercepts and could predict enemy responses with accuracy that impressed even Jake. Her insectoid logical processes complemented his intuitive tactical sense perfectly. Borkin struggled, more than the others, with their evolving mission parameters. His empathic abilities made him acutely aware of the psychological damage their tactics inflicted on enemies. But he also recognized that Jake's methods often prevented greater suffering by ending conflicts quickly rather than allowing them to escalate. Thrix had developed new applications for his phasing abilities that bordered on psychological torture. He could appear inside enemy positions without warning, plant evidence of betrayal among hostile forces, and create the impression that nowhere was safe from coalition retaliation. These capabilities made him invaluable for Jake's psychological operations. The mission against Korthak began with Jake doing something that horrified coalition observers. He initiated contact with the rogue admiral and offered to join his rebellion. Jake claimed he was disillusioned with coalition leadership and wanted to help expose their corruption. The offer was obviously false, but Jake delivered it with conviction. That made Korthak consider the possibility. Lisa monitored these communications with growing anxiety. Jake was improvising dialogue that painted coalition leadership in the worst possible light, while praising Korthak's courage and vision. To outside observers, it looked like genuine defection rather than psychological manipulation. But Jake's real strategy was more subtle than simple deception. He was studying Korthak's responses to identify psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited later. Every conversation provided information about the rogue admiral's motivations, fears, and decision-making patterns. Korthak's initial suspicion gradually gave way to cautious interest as Jake continued feeding his ego and validating his grievances against coalition leadership. The rogue admiral began sharing details about his plans and the defensive capabilities of his captured station. Jake encouraged these revelations while pretending to offer tactical advice for improved security. The psychological manipulation escalated when Jake began introducing subtle doubts about Korthak's allies and subordinates. He suggested that some of the station personnel might be coalition agents and recommended increased surveillance of their activities. These suggestions played on Korthak's existing paranoia and began fracturing trust within his organization. Thrix supported Jake's psychological campaign by appearing unexpectedly in various parts of the station and leaving evidence that suggested infiltration by coalition forces. Personnel began reporting unexplained equipment failures and mysterious sounds that created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Zenth Ka used his demolitions expertise to create minor explosions near the station that could be detected by their sensors but caused no actual damage. These incidents supported Jake's warnings about coalition reconnaissance activities and increased pressure on Korthak's decision-making processes. Veltar intercepted and analyzed all communications from the station, providing Jake with real-time intelligence about the effectiveness of his psychological operations. She could track how Korthak's emotional state was deteriorating and predict when he would be most vulnerable to manipulation. The campaign's climax came when Jake convinced Korthak that a full coalition assault was imminent and offered to help coordinate the station's defense. He recommended that Korthak concentrate his forces at specific positions that would supposedly provide the best defensive advantage. In reality, these positions isolated Korthak's supporters from each other and made them vulnerable to targeted attacks. When coalition forces finally moved against the station, they found Korthak's defenses positioned exactly where Jake had predicted they would be. The rogue admiral had unknowingly arranged his own defeat by following tactical advice from his supposed ally. The operation succeeded with minimal casualties on both sides. Korthak and his supporters were captured while the research station was secured intact. The classified weapon designs never reached hostile forces, and coalition security was maintained. But the mission's success created new problems for Lisa and her squad. Video recordings of Jake's psychological manipulation techniques raised ethical questions that reached the highest levels of coalition government. Some species demanded restrictions on human military personnel, while others requested access to their tactical methods. Admiral Keth Ra conducted the most intensive debriefing yet following the Korthak mission. She wanted to understand every aspect of Jake's psychological campaign and its implications for future military operations. Lisa found herself explaining techniques that she was still learning to comprehend. The Admiral's questions revealed how much Jake's methods differed from established coalition doctrine. Traditional military ethics emphasized honor, direct confrontation, and minimal deception. Jake's approach relied on manipulation, misdirection, and exploitation of psychological vulnerabilities that most species considered taboo. Coalition psychologists studied recordings of Jake's conversations with Korthak and were disturbed by his ability to manipulate emotions and decision-making processes. They wanted to understand how humans had developed such sophisticated psychological warfare capabilities and whether other species could learn similar techniques. The Ethical Review Board spent weeks analyzing the mission parameters and Jake's methods. Their final report concluded that while his tactics were effective, they represented a fundamental challenge to coalition military ethics. The board recommended that human personnel receive special oversight and that their methods be carefully regulated. These recommendations led to a significant change in Unit Epsilon 7 status. They were reclassified as a special weapons asset rather than a standard military unit. This designation gave them access to resources and missions that regular coalition forces could not handle, but it also placed them under strict oversight and operational restrictions. Jake accepted these changes without complaint, but Lisa noticed he was becoming more selective about sharing his tactical thinking with superiors. He continued developing new psychological warfare techniques, but kept detailed explanations to himself unless specifically required to provide them. The other squad members adapted to their new status in different ways. Zenthka embraced their reputation as elite operators and began training other coalition personnel in human tactical methods. Veltar focused on developing intelligence capabilities that supported psychological operations. Borkin struggled with the ethical implications, but remained committed to the squad's mission. Thrix found their new classification intellectually stimulating and began researching historical human conflicts to better understand the theoretical foundations of Jake's methods. The gaseous being was fascinated by humanity's long history of asymmetric warfare and innovative tactical solutions. The summons came on a Tuesday morning that would change everything for Unit Epsilon 7. Lisa received orders to report to Coalition Supreme Command, along with her entire squad, for what was described as a comprehensive evaluation. Jake studied the official language and told her this was not a routine review, but a tribunal that would determine their future role in coalition military operations. The tribunal chamber was filled with representatives from 17 different species, including several admirals Lisa had never seen before. Jake recognized the setup immediately as a formal military hearing designed to determine whether humans should be classified as allies, assets, or potential threats to coalition security. Admiral Keth Ra opened the proceedings by reviewing Unit Epsilon 7's mission history. Their success rate was perfect, but their methods had generated controversy throughout Coalition Command. The tribunal needed to determine whether human tactical approaches represented valuable military innovation or dangerous deviation from acceptable warfare standards. Jake listened to the summary of their missions with characteristic calm, but Lisa could sense tension in his posture. He understood that this hearing would determine not just their squad's future, but the role of all humans in coalition military forces. The stakes could not be higher. The first phase of the tribunal focused on tactical analysis. Coalition experts presented detailed studies of Jake's methods and their effectiveness compared to conventional approaches. The data showed that human tactics succeeded where traditional methods failed, but often involved psychological manipulation and casualty acceptance that violated coalition ethical standards. Representative Thork Vell of the Saurian Council questioned Jake directly about his willingness to use deception and psychological warfare. Jake's response was measured but honest. He explained that humans had learned these methods through thousands of years of warfare against opponents who possessed superior technology or numbers. Survival had required innovation and the willingness to use any advantage available. The Saurian representative pressed further, asking whether Jake felt any moral conflict about manipulating enemy psychology. Jake considered the question carefully before responding that he felt more conflict about allowing conflicts to escalate unnecessarily when psychological tactics could end them quickly with fewer casualties overall. This answer sparked intense debate among the tribunal members. Some species viewed Jake's utilitarian approach as evidence of human moral flexibility that could be valuable in extreme situations. Others saw it as proof that humans lack the ethical constraints necessary for civilized warfare. Admiral Keth Ra called for a practical demonstration to settle the debate. She announced that Unit Epsilon 7 would participate in a training exercise against Coalition Special Forces units. The scenario would test their capabilities under controlled conditions while allowing tribunal members to observe their methods directly. The exercise parameters were designed to be impossible by conventional standards. Jake's squad would face 3 elite coalition units in a simulated urban warfare environment. They would be outnumbered 12-1 and given deliberately inadequate equipment. The opposing forces would have superior weapons, better defensive positions, and advanced knowledge of the terrain. Jake accepted the challenge without hesitation, but requested permission to brief his squad privately before the exercise began. The tribunal agreed, and Unit Epsilon 7 gathered in a secure room to discuss their approach. Lisa watched Jake analyze the scenario and realized how much her understanding of tactics had evolved. Instead of focusing on their disadvantages, Jake was identifying opportunities created by the opposing forces' assumptions about how the exercise would unfold. Zenth Ka asked what strategy Jake recommended for dealing with such overwhelming odds. Jake's answer reflected everything he had learned about human warfare philosophy. He said they would win by refusing to fight the battle their opponents expected and instead creating chaos that would force the enemy to react to situations they had not prepared for. The exercise began with coalition observers expecting to witness a demonstration of human resourcefulness, followed by inevitable defeat. The opposing forces had studied Unit Epsilon 7's previous missions and believed they understood how to counter Jake's psychological tactics. What happened next would be analyzed by military academies for decades afterward. Jake immediately abandoned the urban terrain where his opponents expected to fight and moved his squad into the maintenance tunnels beneath the simulation area. This gave them mobility advantages that the opposing forces had not anticipated. Thrix used his phasing abilities to plant false intelligence that convinced enemy units they were facing a much larger force than actually existed. The psychological pressure began immediately as coalition special forces found evidence of infiltration everywhere they looked but could not locate the actual threats. Veltar intercepted and modified enemy communications to create confusion about Unit Epsilon 7's location and intentions. She fed contradictory information to different enemy units that made coordinated response impossible. The elite coalition forces began working against each other without realizing it. Zenth Ka created the impression of massive firepower by using small explosive devices that produced disproportionate noise and visual effects. The enemy forces responded to these apparent attacks by concentrating in defensive positions that actually made them more vulnerable to Jake's real strategy. Borkin monitored the emotional states of enemy personnel and provided Jake with real-time intelligence about their stress levels and decision-making capacity. This information allowed Jake to time his attacks for maximum psychological impact when opponents were least able to respond effectively. Jake coordinated these elements into a campaign that systematically destroyed enemy morale without inflicting significant casualties. Within 2 hours, the opposing forces were requesting extraction from what they believed was an impossible tactical situation. The tribunal members watched in stunned silence as 3 elite coalition units were defeated by a squad they had expected to lose quickly. The victory was so decisive that several representatives questioned whether the exercise had been conducted fairly. Admiral Keth Raw reviewed the sensor recordings to verify that no rules had been violated. Jake's squad had indeed been outnumbered and outgunned as specified. They had won through superior tactical thinking and the willingness to embrace unpredictability that their opponents could not counter. Representative Velthon of the Crystalline Assembly asked Jake to explain how he had predicted enemy responses so accurately. Jake's answer revealed the fundamental difference between human and coalition approaches to warfare. He said humans assumed their enemies would behave rationally and planned accordingly, while coalition forces assumed enemies would follow doctrine and were unprepared when they did not. The demonstration convinced even skeptical tribunal members that human tactical capabilities represented something unique in coalition military experience. But it also raised new questions about whether such capabilities could be safely integrated into existing command structures. Dr. Yentka, the tribunal's chief psychologist, presented an analysis of human warfare psychology that helped explain Jake's methods. Humans had evolved in an environment where survival required constant adaptation to changing threats. This had produced cognitive flexibility and risk assessment capabilities that were unusual among coalition species. The psychologist's report concluded that humans were natural asymmetric warfare specialists who could find solutions in situations where other species would see only impossible choices. Their willingness to accept calculated risks and use unconventional methods made them valuable assets in extreme circumstances. But the report also warned that human psychological traits could become liabilities in conventional military operations. Their tendency toward independent decision-making and disregard for established protocols could create command and control problems in large-scale conflicts. After 3 days of deliberation, the tribunal reached its decision. Unit Epsilon 7 would be redesignated as a high-risk tactical weapon rather than a standard military unit. This classification recognized their unique capabilities while acknowledging the need for special oversight and deployment restrictions. Designation came with significant implications for Jake and his squad mates. They would have access to advanced equipment and priority mission status, but would operate under strict supervision. Their methods would be studied and potentially replicated by other coalition forces, but only under carefully controlled conditions. Jake accepted the new classification without visible emotion, but Lisa could sense his satisfaction with the outcome. He had proven that human tactical thinking had value in coalition military operations, while maintaining the independence necessary for his methods to remain effective. Lisa realized that her squad had accomplished something unprecedented in coalition history. They had forced an alliance of advanced civilizations to acknowledge that sometimes primitive approaches could be superior to sophisticated doctrine. The rookie assignment that had seemed like a burden 18 months earlier had become the foundation for a new understanding of warfare.